Hi, welcome to Wicked Yankee Adventures. I'm your host, Bucky Lewis. Back in the early 1960s, people were looking up at the sky a lot. They were looking for missiles. Paranoia was rampant. The Cold War was raging. Sputnik and Mercury were racing towards the stars. They were also looking for spaceships. It was the golden age of science fiction, the dawn of dreaming of space travel, buoyed by shows like The Twilight Zone, The Outer Limits, The Jetsons. What boy didn't want a ray gun under the Christmas tree? And more people were claiming to see UFOs. Then one night, September 19th, 1961, it happened. The first recorded event of an alien abduction.
Betty and Barney Hill, a newlywed couple from Portsmouth, New Hampshire, were coming home from their honeymoon in Canada and were driving late at night through the White Mountains of New Hampshire when Betty looked up at the sky and saw a bright light. They thought at first it was a satellite or an aircraft, but the more they watched it, they knew it was not. It was flying in an uneven manner and was also following the car. As it got closer, it began to pulsate and hover, the white light exploding into a kaleidoscope of colors. Their bodies started to tingle and spark. 2 hours and 35 miles later, they were surprised the sun was coming up and that they were that much closer to their home than they thought, and could not account for the missing time. Afterwards, they were hypnotized. An Air Force study was done. Dozens of books were written. Star maps and images of the aliens were drawn. There even was a made-for-TV movie. This seemed to be a legitimate alien abduction.
But why did these extraterrestrials pick the White Mountains of New Hampshire to conduct their first meet and greet? Well, Betty and Barney's close encounter came near one of New Hampshire's most iconic and mysterious landmarks, the Indian Head Rock. Coincidence or something more than that? Some people think that these sites are more than natural wonders and marvels of nature, but part of an ancient grid of architectural beacons pulsing with energy, pointing to something greater. Call it an alien GPS marker, if you will, a cosmic roadside guiding visitors from the stars. We recently visited a megalithic site in New Hampshire to delve into the concept that extraterrestrials had to be involved. What we found was much, much more.
We're in Salem, New Hampshire, and there is an amazing site here. It is America's Stonehenge. It is an incredible array of stones assembled, and there's a lot of mystery as to how did it get here, who built it, and why. We're here in Salem, New Hampshire at America's Stonehenge with the owner, Dennis Stone. Now, Dennis, that's a little unique that your last name is Stone.
It's our name, and we've never changed our name. That's our name, and the name of the place was changed to America's Stonehenge in 1982 to better reflect its astronomical alignments to Stonehenge in England. But that is our name, and everybody kind of teases us about it, so I think it's preordained.
Dennis, you say astronomical alignment with Stonehenge. Tell us what you mean by that.
The site functions very similar to Stonehenge in England. It's aligned with 51 alignments for the sun, moon, and stars. And so it's kind of a calendar site. It kept track of the sun's motions, the moon's motions, and also stars. And it's on top of a hill. And ancient people tended to do this around the world, but this site is quite sophisticated with that many alignments.
So who do you think it was that actually put this together? Was it the Native Americans from a long time ago?
That's a great question. We're still studying that after about 100 years, and we still don't have the answer. Our best guess from the evidence we have is that Old World people visited here, but we know Native Americans were here for over 10,000 years also. So it comes up against were Native Americans directly involved with this and how much? If not, were these people from Western Europe? And there's some evidence supporting that too.
I never even thought, I automatically assumed when we came here that this was done from, cavemen or pre-cavemen or, 10,000 years ago. So you're saying that this might have been from early European settlers?
Very possibly. They built 50,000 megalithic sites throughout Western Europe. But megalithic sites aren't just a Western European phenomena. They're actually in South Africa. They're in Korea had about 100,000 megalithic sites, Korean Peninsula. And they're in China, India. They're actually in Australia. And that's one of the most recent finds is they're in Australia, and New Zealand has a few too.
When you use the word megalithic, okay, let's ask, What do you mean by megalithic?
Well, it comes from two Greek words, mega meaning big, like megabucks, and litho comes from lithos, which is the word stone, like my name.
Yeah.
So it's big stone sites. And I guess most people are familiar with Stonehenge, and that's one example of a megalithic site. And they go from the new Stone Age in Europe right into the Bronze Age. By the end of the Bronze Age, the Iron Age begins, and they start building these magnificent stone structures. For some reason, they got into building more forts and that kind of thing. But these seem to be a worldwide on 6 continents out of 7. The Antarctic is the only place I know that these things don't exist.
It is amazing that UFOs actually have some sort of relevance to these megaliths.
And we think they do. There's records of UFOs near these megalithic sites all over the world, and particularly in the Hudson Valley, where in the 1980s they had that flap down there, and it became very, very famous. And that's where about 200 of these sites are located.
200? Holy cow. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And some of my fellow pilots I was flying at the time with the airlines actually cited some of these, and they made it into the papers, the magazines, and even on TV back around 1983 or 84. And about 10 years ago, one of the shows on one of the cable networks was kind of a big UFO show. They actually showed some of these chambers. And just last year, they did the same thing on another cable network, showing the chambers and tying it into UFOs. And because just down the street, you had the famous incident at Exeter, 1965.
Was that Barney?
That gets confused. That's when it happened up in northern New Hampshire. This was a whole separate incident in 65, 4 years after Bonnie and Betty Hill's famous interrupted journey.
You mean they had 2?
There's 2 in New Hampshire, and they both were written up by a guy named Fuller. But the other thing I forgotten about but saw the other night is Mount Washington. They have the first UFO photograph ever taken anywhere of a cigar-shaped object back in the 1800s. And I think that's kind of significant and forgotten.
It's cigar-shaped object. I mean, they might look like blimps or something like that.
That's a possibility,
It's
too.
a possibility.
But I think it was before the blimp era, though,
Right? So, I mean, a lot of people go, is this Air Force technology that's super secret? But there are maneuvers that these UFOs have done. And as a pilot, you actually are saying, hey, I kind of believe that there might be possibilities out there.
Absolutely. I think the universe is probably full of life. And some of it has attained technology that can travel here and, visit. It's not limited by our technology on Earth. It's, probably a lot more advanced than us. So I have no problem with that.
Whether you're a hardened skeptic or open-minded believer, one truth holds firm. The more data we gather, the more the line between fiction and possibility is blurred. We visited one of the leading scientists in the field, Dr. Avi Loeb, head of the Galileo Project, and also the leading scientist at Harvard University.
Yes, the same kind of story that seems to come down from long ago. 2 friends having coffee together when something flies by their window. Somebody like a dream, but God me hypnotized.
Hi, I'm Tara Duffy with Wicked Yankee TV. We have an incredible guest today here that's causing quite a stir in the scientific community. Professor Avi Loeb from Harvard University, professor of astronomy. So thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
Avi, laymen like myself have no idea about the numbers in astronomy. It's so hard to fathom. When I was reading your book, which is an amazing book, I had no idea that the Milky Way galaxy, now I hope I get this right and you correct me, the Milky Way galaxy, the number of planets that could support life or have life similar to life right here on Earth is, and when I asked one of the producers, they said 1,000. When I asked my mom this morning, she says 100. I said, no, Mom, 55. And she goes, 55? I go, 55 billion planets right in the Milky Way galaxy. That's mind-blowing.
It is. And there are a trillion galaxies like it in the observable volume of the universe. So altogether, there are more planets that could support life in the observable volume of the universe than there are grains of sand on all beaches on Earth. So if you think about an emperor or a king that conquered a piece of land on Earth and was very proud of himself, that is quite ridiculous because it's just like an ant hugging a single grain of sand on the landscape of a huge beach. It's not very impressive. So when you think about the big picture, we cannot be alone. It makes no sense. Most of the stars formed billions of years before the sun. We are relatively late comers to the game, and it's possible there were technological civilizations like ours billions of years ago, and they might be dead by now, just like cultures that existed on Earth in the past. But that doesn't mean that we cannot find evidence for them. We cannot have a phone conversation with them, but we can look for relics that they left behind, just like we do in archaeological digs. We can do space archaeology and search for relics that are floating in space. Just like Voyager 1, Voyager 2, New Horizons, these are spacecraft that we launched into space. And if other civilizations before us launched equipment billions of years ago, we might find it. On October 19th, 2017, the Pan-STARRS telescope in Hawaii found the first object that came from outside the solar system in our neighborhood. And it was given the name Oumuamua, which means a scout in the Hawaiian language. And at first, astronomers thought, well, it must be a rock, just like a comet or an asteroid that we have seen before from within the solar system. But actually, it's a very interesting finding because it's just like finding an object from the street in your backyard. So it saves you the trip to go to the street and figure out what's going on out there, since the object made the trip. And, traveling between stars takes a long time. With chemical rockets that we have right now, or at the speed of Oumuamua, it takes about 50,000 years to go to the nearest star. So fortunately, it already made it to our backyard, so we better examine it. And in fact, we didn't expect an object like Oumuamua to be discovered. I wrote a paper a decade earlier saying that the number of rocks that we could discover is much smaller than what you need to see one of them in a survey like Pan-STARRS had. So that was a surprise by itself. But then as we gathered more data on this object, it looked very weird. As one of my colleagues said after hearing a colloquium on this object, he said, well, this object is so weird, I wish it never existed, which to me sounded like a completely wrong approach, because here is an opportunity to learn something new that you haven't expected. So we should cherish that rather than resent it. And the reason it looked weird is because, first of all, as it was tumbling every 8 hours, its brightness changed by a factor of 10, and the amount of sunlight that it reflected was changing by a factor of 10, meaning that it has an extreme shape, and in fact, most likely flat, pancake shape. And then in addition, the object was pushed away from the sun by some force, in addition to the force of gravity that was acting on it. And that force declined inversely with distance from the sun squared. And there was no cometary tail around it, so there couldn't be a rocket effect pushing it from evaporated gases like we see in comets. Right. And so the only explanation that I could think of was the reflection of sunlight. And for that to be effective, the object had to be very thin, sort of like a sail on a boat, except not being pushed by the wind, but being pushed by reflecting sunlight. And this is called a light sail, which is basically a thin sheet of material that reflects light. And as a result, it gets pushed, just like when you imagine billiard balls bouncing off a surface, they give it a push. And in the same way, particles of light, when they bounce off a sail, they give it a push. And it turns out that in September 2020, there was another object discovered, which exhibited a push as a result of reflecting sunlight and no cometary tail. And it was given the name 2020 SO. It was discovered by the same telescope, Pan-STARRS. But shortly afterwards, the astronomers realized, actually, this object, if you trace it back in time, came from Earth. It's actually a rocket booster that was launched in 1966, and it had very thin walls. And that's why it had a lot of area for its weight, for its mass, so it could be pushed by reflecting sunlight. And we know that we made this object. It's artificial. We don't know who made Oumuamua.
And that's where the big question comes in.
That's right.
We are not alone.
Maybe we are not. But of course, the way to find out, to be confident that it's artificial and not natural, is to take a photograph. We couldn't take a photograph of this object because it was too far away and rather small, roughly the size of a football field. But you can imagine in the future, when I go to the kitchen and I see one ant, I get alarmed because there must be many more out there. And so, given that we found this object within a few years of looking at the sky, we will find many more in the future. And if we find one on its approach to us, and we have an alert a year in advance, we could send a spacecraft equipped with a camera that will take a close-up photograph. And we could potentially even land on it, just like the mission OSIRIS-REx that took a photograph and landed on the asteroid Bennu. And just imagine taking a photograph of an artificial object. It would look very different than a rock. And then landing on it may allow us to read off the label made on planet X. And maybe even import a technology back to Earth. That could be worth a lot of money because it may represent a technology that will take us 1 million years to develop ourselves. So it could be very exciting if something like that is found.
Woke up this morning with light in my eyes, and then realized it was still dark outside. It was a light coming down from the sky. I don't know who or why. Hey, Mr. Spaceman, won't you please take me along? I won't do anything wrong. Hey, Mr. Spaceman, won't you please take me along for a ride? Hey, Mr. Spaceman, won't you please take me along? I won't do anything wrong. Hey, Mr. Spaceman, won't you please take me along for a ride?